Hello everybody and welcome back to Middle-earth. This is Count MRVHS with another video update for Wainriders, and today we are taking a look at the Chiefdom of the Angren. You can disregard this tooltip here where it says Chiefdom of Dunland. I just haven't gotten around to changing the faction name to its proper term, the Chiefdom of the Angren. Now the Angren is the Sindarin name of the river Eisen, which is going to be the more familiar term, but of course Wainriders is set well before the arrival of the Rohirrim, and that is where the river Eisen comes from. It's sort of a Rohirric term, I guess you could say. So before then, it was called the Angren, and this faction, essentially, if you can picture in your mind the Gap of Rohan, going from essentially Orthanc in the north down towards what would later become known as the Hornburg in the south. These two fortresses are kind of the linchpins, along with that northward bend of the river Eisen, or formerly Angren, were sort of the linchpins of the northwestern frontier of Gondor. So what is this faction all about? Well, we'll go over the units first here, and then we will let the battle unfold and discuss that. So here you are looking at the Chieftain's Guard for the Chiefdom of the Angren. This is an infantry bodyguard. They've got swords, good armor, mail, helmets, shields, a very robust unit, and so I've risked putting them right in the center of the front line here. We'll see how they perform. To the side, we've got picked clansmen. So these are a bit less well-armored, perhaps, but still got some decent quality mail, helmets, large shields, axes, and I believe throwing spears as a secondary weapon. They've got a ranged attack in addition to their quite considerable melee skills, which can be augmented further thanks to their war cry ability. To the left of them, we find tower guards, and this is where some of the patterns of the faction may begin to emerge. There is this more middlemen style, perhaps, on the one hand, and then the more Dúnedainic style on the other. So the tower guards represent that kind of Dúnedainic influence. Of course, that makes sense. This is a faction that is occupying territory right on the fringes of Gondor's power. And so the tower guards are your spears, your units of the line. They are armed in a very similar way to Gondor's militia, as you can probably tell, but they do have some substantial armor in that mail and those helms, and again, good shields. So this is going to be a very solid line for your faction, I would say. But some of these units are fairly high tier. You've got, of course, your bodyguard. This is, I think, a tier 3 unit. Picked clansman, maybe a tier 4. I can't quite remember. But having a solid line like this is going to take you a little while in terms of your military development. Before that point, you will have units such as this, the more lightly armed common folk of the area, Gwathwyrim militia. We imagine that people who occupied what later became Rohan, that is Calenardhon, and I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but that area of Middle-earth that eventually became Rohan, at this point was occupied by probably local middlemen, as they may have been referred to by the Dúnedain, and that's what we've represented with these Gwathwyrim-type units. They're fairly poorly armed, fairly numerous, though. As you can tell, 120 men in a huge unit size is going to be pretty substantial. So these are going to be fairly basic troops, good for garrison, good for flanks. I've got them here kind of in a flank reserve position. Another Gwathwyrim unit is the bowmen. So these are going to be, again, fairly numerous and cheap, but not a lot of melee or defensive staying power. On the other hand, a more Gondorian-influenced unit is these tower bowmen. And again, the tower here is a reference to Orthanc or Angrenost, these very prominent Númenórean, I believe, designed structures that go way back in history. So these are going to be longbowmen, but they have good armor and good skill with swords in addition. You're going to want mostly to use them as archers, and as such I've deployed a couple of units of these guys in the back and at the flank, with the idea that theoretically they could go around and do some flanking as well. On this side, I've put a couple of units of Gwathwyrim axemen. So these are two-handed axe units. Again, like the other Gwathwyrim units in this faction, these are fairly low armored, but they do have a bit of leather armor and helmets. What you're going to want to use these guys for is the headlong charge, preferably into a unit that is already being pinned and you're getting a flank attack. They're going to be effective against armor, but they're not going to have a lot of staying power. You also have some skirmishers. So these Gwathwyrim clansmen are similar to some of Dunland's units, if you remember from the 4th Age. So these are going to be pretty robust skirmishers with good shields, some leather armor as well, and the ability to fight in melee a little bit at need, but probably only in a flanking capacity or against other skirmishers. So I'm using them here to screen the line because I do have some concerns about being charged potentially in my front line, especially with my general being right there. On the other wing, we've got a couple of more savage-looking units. These wolf hunters are going to be more available in traditional Dunlanding provinces, more in Enedwaith on the western side of the Misty Mountains. So not too far out of your reach, but this is not necessarily territory that this faction will own at the beginning of the campaign. They'll have to expand into it. At least that's how we're kind of imagining it now. So this is a unit that is going to be very frightening, as you may imagine. They have javelins in addition to these large, wicked-looking blades. And so they're going to be going to cause fear, going to be able to war cry, berserk, just going to be kind of a nightmare for other units to deal with. And right behind them, we've got a couple of these, or one unit of these very large and intimidating Enedwaith hillmen. Again, sort of a Dunlanding influence here, the ability to crush armor with these crude but effective maces or clubs. But you can tell that the armor for both of these units is very low, so it's kind of a game of hoping your other units can block, or you can catch the enemy off guard with a good charge. You do have some cavalry also with this faction, so this is, in a lot of ways, an extremely balanced faction to play. It'll be a lot of fun to sort of get the army composition that you like and sort of try out different tactics. So here we've got Gwathwyrim scouts. These are a light javelin cavalry, essentially, but they do have the ability to be effective potentially at a charge, especially if they are dealing with skirmisher types. So you want to get them around, do a bit of micromanaging, throw their javelins, and then potentially charge. I've backed them up with my Gwathwyrim horsemen. So these are a more solid melee cavalry unit. You can tell they've got mail, helms, spears, as well as swords for a more close quarters unit. So these guys are going to, again, be very middle ground in some ways. They can kind of do a bit of it all, and that's sort of appropriate in the sense that this is a middleman faction. One of the things that I really like about Wainriders is during the 19th century of the Third Age, there is a lot of these opportunities to explore what were known as the middlemen of Middle-earth. These are not the people who were in the service of Sauron. These are also not Dunedain. These are, in a lot of ways, the native inhabitants of Middle-earth before the Númenóreans came and started establishing their great kingdoms. These are people who would probably mistrust the elves. These are people who may look askance at the expansion of Dunedainic kingdoms. And we know in the case of the Black Forest tribes, or the people who lived in Minhiriath and Enedwaith during the Númenórean expansion, that they were in fact enemies of the Númenóreans because they were cutting down all the trees in their homeland. So there's a lot of interesting sort of narratives here that come out between the Dunedain and the what you might think of as the native Mannish population of Middle-earth. So I really like the idea of exploring that with the Chiefdom of the Angren. Now, in terms of who they're fighting here, we're fighting the Black Forest tribes, which does seem appropriate because if you think of where these guys are going to be located, the Black Forest is, or the Blackwood, is in the western coastlands. So it's sort of Erenvorn is this peninsula kind of to the west of Minhiriath and Enedwaith. But there's not that much in between them and, say, what later would become known as the Gap of Rohan. So there's a lot of opportunity for these two factions to expand into each other. One of the controversial things you might say about this faction, the Chiefdom of the Angren, as a faction, is that they're occupying that linchpin in northwestern Gondor, which is the line, or the Gap of Rohan, right? The line of the upper Angren or Eisen, which was so crucial to protecting from these Enedwaith factions, to prevent them from sweeping into Calenardhon and upsetting the balance of power there. Well, what we imagine for the Wainriders period is that this is likely to be a time when Gondor is extremely focused on its east, so much more concerned with holding the line of the Anduin, and more than happy to let these hereditary chieftains sort of take care of the defense of its northwestern frontier. And we know that this did happen to an extent. This is somewhat backed up by the lore, because we know that at a certain point, there were these hereditary chieftains occupying, say, the tower at Orthanc. And so that's kind of the genesis of this faction, the Chiefdom of the Angren. It's not necessarily attested in the lore as a separate independent faction, but we do know that Orthanc essentially broke away at a certain point and became much more friendly with the natives, shall we say. There were very few people of Gondorian blood who were manning the tower at a certain point. And of course, this is all prior to the arrival of the Rohirrim, which really changed the balance of power in the area. But given that Wainriders is set hundreds of years prior to that, we thought it would be interesting to not just give Gondor all of this territory of Calenardhon, but to say, what if we put the player in charge of a frontier outpost of Gondor, so to speak? So there absolutely will be elements of Gondor, as we can see illustrated by the Tower Guards or the Tower Bowmen, who are part of this faction. Your family members may be Gondorian themselves. There's going to be the subcultures in play where they will be descended from men of Gondor. So it's going to be a mix, and a very interesting mix at that. In terms of your goals for the campaign, of course, expanding towards the former region of Tharbad might be a good goal, because no one is really in charge of that at this point. It's kind of a middle ground between the North Kingdom and the South Kingdom. So maybe holding that north-south road would be a good goal, and of course, protecting yourself from these more wild and uncivilized Blackwood folk would be something you'd want to do as well. But you will have to keep an eye on the east. What's going to happen with the Wainrider invasion? If Gondor cannot hold the line of the Anduin, you may find wild Easterlings sweeping in from that direction of the map. Or indeed, you may find that Gondor itself is doing too good a job, perhaps, against the Wainriders, and is now interested in retaking direct control over these towers, such as Orthanc and so on. So it's going to be an interesting balancing act, I think, with the Chiefdom of the Angren. You've got this central position holding that pass, but you've got enemies and opportunities on both sides. So at any rate, I hope you found this interesting. It looks like we've got basically everybody on the run at this point, so I think this is a decent place for us to stop the video. Follow the channel for other updates for Wainriders. We are continuing apace on the development of the mod. Let me know what faction you'd like to see next, or if you have any questions about this, leave those in the comments below. I'll leave links to our TotalWarCenter.net forums, and you can join us for discussions about the mod there or on the Discord as well. Take care, everybody, and have a great day.